Hi, this is Patsy with a Z. Welcome to Joy on Paper Live, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who wants to know the story behind a book. And oh boy, do we have a new story from a wonderful author, SASHA Peyton Smith. And she's going to introduce us to her new romantasy. She is a New York Times bestselling author. And I am so happy to welcome you, SASHA.
Thank you so
Hi.
much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, this is a big deal, a romantasy, something. Now it's going to get into our vocabulary. Wow. And the name of the book is The Rose Bargain. And this is the first, it's a series. You're planning a series of this, I hope. I said.
I am. I turned in the first draft of the sequel last night.
Oh, good, good. Because once people read this, then they start counting the days. Because as I mentioned, you are a New York Times best-selling author. My goodness, my goodness. And I think I mentioned to you that I thought you looked like a teenager, but a little bit older. But boy, oh boy, when was your first book? I want to show everybody this. I love the covers of The Witch Hunt. They are so cool. I got a kick out of these covers. You became a best-selling author with these books. How did that happen? That's so exciting. People want to know, how did it happen, SASHA?
I ask myself the same thing. Yeah, so The Witch Haven and The Witch Hunt, those are my first two books. I am a biologist by training, actually. I went to school for biology and then I got my master's degree in public health in Washington, D.C. And I moved away from my hometown where I'd gone to college to the big city for grad school. And I was sitting in my apartment and I had no friends and I was in this unfamiliar place. And I honestly never really identified as a writer, but I was always a massive reader. I think in my heart of hearts, I was afraid to admit to myself that I wanted to be a writer because that felt like a very risky dream. But, all of a sudden I was in this unfamiliar place without that much to occupy my time. And I had the idea for a book, which was my first series. It was about a school for witches disguised as a tuberculosis sanitarium in 1911 New York. And I thought to myself, how hard could it be? I wanted to prove to myself that I could finish a book. And it turns out the answer is incredibly hard. It was very hard to write a book. But I did. I finished a first draft and I entered into this mentorship program, which tragically no longer exists, but I was accepted into this author run mentorship program called Pitch Wars. And from there, I was introduced to my fabulous agent who got me a book deal. And then the book became this kind of sleeper hit. Nobody really expected it to do as well as it ended up doing. And I'm so grateful for the readers that picked it up, that took a risk on a debut author. So I started writing that book when I was 23, 24, and it came out when I was 28.
It takes time. Always the first one takes longest, but I love it because I was a med tech, and so I worked in a laboratory, and I love everything. I always love any books that involve medicine. It just thrills me. And so this one, that's those two books I thought were so great. One of my first guests on my radio program, which I started almost 10 years ago, was Robin Cook, and as his medical mysteries were set the tone. I think before that, people weren't really interested in anything to do with medicine. And so it's nice that you get to use, a little bit of your science background and to blend it in, right?
Definitely. Yeah. I find myself using my science background more than I would expect in books. I also got lucky in that because I was a biology major, I have a lot of friends who later became doctors. And so I do have a deep Rolodex of people I can text horrifying questions. If somebody was stabbed in the neck, how quick would it take them to bleed out?
Yeah. That's nice. You need people like that. When I got the Rose Bargain, I first of all, just the cover is so gorgeous. It's lush. I just love this cover.
I
Don't
got
you?
really I love it. I got really lucky. It's by a fabulous artist named Tran Wen, and she does all of she does all of her art hand done in colored pencil. So that is a colored pencil
I
piece
know.
that she did on this like matte piece of parchment. And she is beyond talented. I love all of her work and the book covers that she does.
I recognize that I'm a bit of an artist myself, so I looked at it the first time I looked at it. I said, "Wow, what technique!" Right away, I won. What's her medium? How did she do it? It is so distinctive. I hope that you're making a major poster of it and have it there in your breakfast room. I could look at that every morning. You actually could sell that as a poster off your website. People would buy it. It's lovely. It does set the tone for what the book is about. And it's intriguing. You've got a lot of stuff in that book. I'm like,
I sure do.
yeah, it was like, woo! We're talking sometimes they talk about twists and plots. But tell people, how did you this new category of romantasy? You've combined a little bit of romance and a lot of fantasy, and your interest in fairies. How did that come about?
Yeah, romantasy is just, I think it's a label that helps readers find the type of book they're looking for faster. Book marketing is always coming up with new terms, but I think that it's great if people can identify the kind of things that they love. I love books where romance is the central plot, and I feel like that's the difference between fantasy with romance and romantasy is if you took the romance out of the plot, would it still work? And there's plenty of books where if you took out the central love story, you still have a complete book around it. Whereas a romantasy book, I think if you take out the central romance, everything else crumbles like a sandcastle. And those are my favorite kinds of fantasies to write. And so I knew going into this that I wanted to write something where the love story was the central conflict. So the Rose Bargain takes place in 1848 London, but the Queen of England is not Queen Victoria. She is a fairy. Tricked her way
Yes,
onto the throne during.
definitely not Queen Victoria. So,
She
so how
tricked
did
her
you
way.
decide this?
It's so funny. The idea, what if the Queen of England was a fairy, just popped into my head one day, which feels so silly. But I was searching for a new book idea that felt fun and exciting and worth exploring. And so I tugged on that thread and decided to follow it and think about what it would look like and how England would be different and how she would exert her power over her people. So in The Rose Bargain, she has been ruling now for 400 years. She tricked her way onto the throne during the War of the Roses, and every citizen gets the opportunity to make one bargain with her. And so these upper crust, high society young women who the book follows, they are expected to make bargains that will help them find husbands. So things like a smaller nose in exchange for your happiest childhood memory, or a talent of piano for a toe. And our main
It's
character, Ivy Benton, finds that very boring. If she's going to touch magic, she wants to make it worth it. And the queen shocks the town when she announces that this is the season that her son, the prince, will take a wife. And so Ivy gets drawn into this kind of vicious competition for his hand. So it was just a really fun book to write. It was my goal when I set out to write it to rediscover the joy of writing and write the kind of book that I personally would have loved at 15. And so I threw in all of my favorite tropes, like kissing for practice and just one bed at the inn and longing across a crowded ballroom and all of these like really juicy things that I think are, I don't know, fun and compelling in a novel written for young adults.
and a little bit, let's say, some mean girl tropes there too.
It's so interesting. I really, something that I set out to do was to make sure that every single girl in the competition for Bram's Hand felt really fleshed out and that they were there for their own reasons. I think that oftentimes these kind of big cast of characters, it's easy to draw people as caricatures. And I was really happy that my editor let me give each girl in the competition her own POV chapter. And so even the characters that feel like they start a little mean, by the time you get to the end of the book, you understand why they've behaved the way they have and made the choices that they have. And I don't think that anybody's good or bad. I think that people are complicated and always making the choices that they feel like are best for them.
Okay, so let's explain the queen. First of all, how did you come up with the name? And then let's talk about this world building that you did because it is a real fantasy. It's lots of fun too.
It's a lot of fun. Yeah. So the queen is named Queen Mor, Queen Morian. And Morgan is a character that appears all throughout British mythology, dating back to the 1000s, is this sorceress, fairy, witch character, depending on which version of the story you're reading. And I came across some document in my preliminary research that in Old English, Morgan would have been pronounced Morian. And there's a lot of Morgans in literature right now. So I just decided to throw the Y in there to pronounce it as phonetically as it would have been pronounced in the 1400s. They call her mostly Queen Mor, which I also just thought was like fun and evocative and felt very fey. And once I created her, I had the really fun task of then deciding what does this world that she is ruling look like and how would England be different. So anything pre-War of the Roses I could not change. And so I had to do a lot of fun research about what existed pre-1471. So I learned things like Parliament was created in the 1000s, so Parliament still exists, or the Prince of Wales title predates 1471, so her son would still be called the Prince of Wales. But then I got to add in all these really fun details. Like now there's a tree growing through the foyer of Kensington Palace, and she uses magic as a tool of control. And, we have these revels, and it was really fun to kind of imbue buttoned up Victorian England with these like little fey magic moments.
So where did you get have you always been interested in fairies, or did it just like
Yeah,
I've
I've
I've always
always,
been interested since I read Jane Eyre. Remember that where that's what Mr. Rochester asks her, where are the little green men? So I
yep.
from that day on, I didn't understand it at the time because I was like 11 years old, and but I've always been intrigued. And later on, I had a Welsh gardener when I moved to England,
Mm.
and so I really got interested in fairies.
Yeah, so I obviously grew up in America, but my family's English. My mother's family is English. My grandmother was from Nottingham. And so I grew up with kind of these like old school fairy myths where they were not human. They were something to be feared, and they were a little uncanny and a little untrustworthy and tricksters. And I'd go on walks as a kid, and if we saw a circle of toadstools, my mom would be like, "Those are the fairies, don't step in between them." And I took that very seriously. And so it was fun to experiment with the darker fairy mythologies. And I thought a lot about too about immortality, which is something that I personally find horrifying. I would not want to live forever, and what living forever would do to somebody. Queen More has been ruling England for over 400 years. She is thousands of years old. And so I can't imagine that does anything good to your sense of altruism or care for others. Above all things, she is really bored. And that was a fun place to create a character from.
Yeah, I like that aspect because my goodness, 400 years. Y- but it's funny in a way, now being interested in biology as you are and I've been getting a lot of books about biology,
Mhm.
about all of these people in Silicon Valley who are trying to find ways to live longer and doing all
Yep.
sorts of actually some weird science is going on that we don't hear about because they really want to live longer. They think they need to live to be 200. I was
Yeah.
surprised how many it's serious. They're doing serious biology studies about how they can keep going.
Definitely. And I think it's really interesting science, but I don't share that desire. I also feel as a reader and as a reader of somebody who loves like myths and fables, I've read way too many Greek myths to want to tempt the gods like that. I feel like you can't publicly be like, I'm the first man who's going to live to 200. That's tempting fate in a way that I am not willing to do.
Exactly. Well, now, as you said, we have the four girls. So tell us how you came out with each of them. Recently spoke to a group of young people about writing, and they wanted to know about the writers I speak to, and they want to know how they develop characters and what they should think. Then when I read this book, of course, I thought, oh my gosh, the fun of coming out with characters. And it was right to write it from each of their point of view. I thought that was very clever.
Yeah, I think any good character has a fundamental desire and a fundamental fear. And so I often start from that place when building characters. I'll just open a blank Google Doc and write their name and then just write in bullet points things that I know about them. So I knew that the story necessitated the creation of a couple of characters. I knew that Emmett, who is one of our princes, was going to be a rake because I wanted to do a classic Victorian romance where you have a boy who is a little bit disgraced. And I knew if I was going to have a rake, then he needed some women who had been left in his wake. And so I made one of the girls who was competing for Bram's hand, Faith Fairchild, who was a ballerina and Prince Emmett's ex. And I thought about what her motivations would be for entering this competition for her ex boyfriend's brother and what her relationship with Emmett would be like. And Faith seems pretty one dimensional in the first couple of chapters, but by the time we get to her perspective, she's able to offer a really nuanced explanation for why she's made the choices she has and what a different life she's led from Ivy and what a different relationship she has with Emmett than Ivy. I think that it's fun to be able to offer multiple perspectives on a character. Emmett is this dream boy for Ivy, and he's somebody who's betrayed Faith. And I feel like that makes people all the more real. I don't think that any person is all good or all bad. I think that everybody's nuanced. And so the ability to explore characters in that way, I always find really rewarding. We have Marion Thorne, who is supposed to be practically perfect in every way. And of course, she's crumbling on the inside. We have Emmy, who only wants adventure and thought that this competition would be a bit of an adventure or a bit of a way out of the life that her parents wanted for her. And then we have Olive Lisenby, who is the true romantic of the book. I really loved writing Olive. She reminded me a lot of myself as a teenager. And she functions a bit as the comic relief. So I always had fun when she was on page.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Absolutely. And it is so much fun to do this character building. As you said, you start off sometimes a name can inspire you to the type of character they're going to be. How did you select these names, Bram?
So it's so funny. I wish I had a more interesting story. The nice thing about writing historical is that I can just Google like popular names Victorian era. And so I just did a Google of a long list of what people were being named in 1830s England and picked the ones that kind of resonated with me the most. And then, of course, with Emmy, who's Japanese, I wanted to make sure it was a name that worked in both Japanese and English. But yeah, Bram and Emmett, truly, I just went on a Victorian name list and I picked the ones that Emmett, I just felt like a dreamy boy name to me. And then Bram felt the most like a fairy name. It felt much more fairy-ish than something like Edmund or Henry. And Ivy and the rest of the girls I picked the same way. I just picked what resonated with me. I know there's a lot of authors who do a lot of world building around their names and the name meaning, but I'm never that clever.
And talk about world building. This is so much fun. You did a lot of research, whether it's the clothes, the food. What are some of the major creations that you came out with?
Yeah, so I really I wanted the book to be fun. So that's like the ultimate compliment. Thank you so much. I really wanted to evoke a feeling of Victorian England, but where something was like just wrong enough underneath the surface, that there was like a rotting underbelly to this very sparkly, fairy Victorian world. And so the Queen's magic is pretty cut and dry fairy bargains where she gives you something and she takes something. And I had a lot of fun writing those bargains. I think maybe my favorite bargain in the book is Greer, who is another competitor for Bram's hand. And Greer bargains to become more beautiful, and in exchange, she can never turn left again. So I had a lot of fun with like comic relief in those scenes where all the other girls are like, let's go. And Greer has to make a full circle to follow them. And then there's more serious.
I mean, that alone is so clever. I just
And then we have more serious costs, like Ivy's sister Lydia, who does not remember what she bargained for because she gave up the memory of the bargain in exchange for whatever it is she received. And so she spends the whole book in a bit of a mystery, trying to figure out what it was she gained and what it was she gave up. So those bargains were a really fun magic system. And then I just wanted to evoke I don't know, a slightly more magical Kensington Palace. Like I said, there's a tree growing through the middle of the palace, and they're having these revels with fairy wine and food and music. And one of the first passages of the book is Ivy says she's only ever been to Kensington Palace as a child to deliver her baby teeth to the gates. And I never touch on it again, but that feeling of, oh, there's something wrong here. I loved creating.
you understand now when you wrote that everybody is going to be bringing their kids to bring their teeth to Kensington Palace, and at some point, King Charles is going to have to say, "Please stop it. We can't."
I would
This
love to accidentally create like an international baby teeth scandal.
well, no, you could because it nowadays in whether it's in Florence or Venice, wherever used to be in Florence, where everybody would bring locks and put locks,
Yeah.
and now and then they cut them all down. Just I'm worried about this one, but tell you should put a little note in your
Keep
website.
me updated if you hear of any teeth at Kensington Palace. I would be very interested to
Yeah,
know.
if anybody who's going to do that, put them in a nice bag, gift bag.
Yeah,
It's so funny. I guarantee you, we will hear this on the news. It's going to happen. It's going to happen because
I'll come back on and discuss it with you, Patsy.
when it happens, you have to. It'll be like breaking news.
Yeah. I'll be in my bathrobe.
That's it. That's it. But it is something like that. You never know. You never know. And you have, let's just say, you have a lot of fans. I think you're knocking it out of the ballpark with the pre-sales.
Oh, God. We'll see. It comes out next week.
People are already talking about it, and there's a special edition, right?
Yeah, there's a couple. I got really lucky. There's a really beautiful special edition being done by Barnes and Noble that has a different cover and a bonus chapter from Prince Emmett's perspective. And so that is a particularly beautiful edition you can get at Barnes and Noble. I also have a couple of special editions through my UK publisher, and LitJoy Crate, which is a book box in the United States, is doing a special edition. So it is truly an embarrassment of riches how many beautiful editions of this book I have.
That does not happen to everybody.
Thank you to say.
When you became a New York best-selling author, the day that it happened and you heard about it, how did you feel?
I was sick with nerves all day. So the thing about the New York Times is You have an idea of what your first week numbers are from your publisher because they can see sales data. But the New York Times is not necessarily a cut and dry list of exactly what the bestsellers were. It usually reflects it, but they sometimes just don't put books on, or things get edited weirdly. They have a proprietary algorithm that's an industry secret. So you don't really know if you're going to be on it until the moment it hits. And so I knew that I had the numbers, but I had absolutely no idea if I was going to make the list. And so I was just nauseous all day. And then I was sitting in my living room, and the list was supposed to come out, supposed to come out. Of course, it was the day it was delayed, and it's a half an hour delayed. And I like want to throw up. And then I get a call from my best friend who is also an author, and their partner works in publishing. So they sometimes get the numbers a little bit early. And my best friend called me, and the first thing they said was, "Do you want to know what number?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they went, "Number two." And I went, "Number two," which is so much higher than I thought I was going to hit. And then I cried and hugged my husband, and we went out to dinner, and it was like such a special, wonderful day.
It's an amazing day. It really is. And then, of course, to discover that you're also going to be translated, and
Yeah,
that's a big deal.
it's incredible. This book has sold in, oh God, like 13 or 14 different countries, which again is like such a cool thing as an author that I write this book alone in my bedroom. And all of a sudden it's going to these places that I will probably never go. It's going across the world, and it's being translated into languages that I don't speak. And I'm getting to communicate ideas across the world and share art across the world, across language barriers. And I can't think of a greater gift as a communicator and as an artist. I feel just profoundly grateful. I don't take it for granted for 1 second, like how cool this is.
Oh, now I'm really frightened for the king because they're going to not just get teeth from people. They're going to come.
All sorts of
I can
languages.
Yeah, they're going to come from all sorts of countries, and they're going to arrive in England. And if their baggage gets checked, why do
Yeah.
you have these teeth? Why do you have these teeth?
Don't
I'm
take your teeth.
I'm afraid every little girl is going to want her teeth. Mother will say, "Well, that's what they do in the book," and
Yeah.
every little girl is going to want her teeth taken too. Oh, so what are some of the languages? Do they give you copies of each of those?
Yeah, so I will get sent the copies eventually. So, yeah, off the top of my head, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, Polish, Dutch, oh gosh, Romanian, Ukrainian. Turkish. It's incredible.
I've been to Poland. I've been to Turkey, and I was young in those days, and so I often played with the children, and
Mhm.
I'm trying to, or the teenagers, because this is a young adult book, and I'm trying to imagine them in art that they're reading your book. One day you might take a trip to one of these countries, and maybe you're in a French cafe, and somebody's sitting over there reading your book. Isn't that?
It would be wild. And it's fun because I feel like all of a sudden now I have these webs of connections to other writers across the world, and that translation is an art. And the fact that all of these translators are lending their brains and their artistry to write a book that I wrote in my bedroom is, I feel so connected to them in this like cool artsy way. I just like it feels like such a gift.
I should have pulled out the sections would think would have been a challenge for them to translate.
I'm sure they're cursing me.
Right? Uh, oh, I think it's just so much fun. I love to see this kind of success. And it's good because, as you said, it's young adult. So I think really young adult. I think you can go down like to 13 or 14 to read this book.
I'd be comfortable giving it to a seventh or an eighth grader. And that's what I love so much about writing for young people is to connect with these teenagers. And I don't think you ever love anything with the passion that you're capable of loving things at 15 and 16. There's just something about your brain at that point in time that is capable of such passionate obsession. And I think of the books that I loved when I was that age, and it's, incredible that my books can mean the same thing to people. But I also think good stories are universal. And so I also get to see adults that are resonating with these books or reconnecting with their teenage selves, or parents or grandparents reading these books alongside their children and connecting over books. It's really cool.
It is, and of course, we need to encourage young people to read more. I've always said is if a book is well written and just a child can grab onto it, they still the ability to have a long attention span. They're saying you have to write everything in quick little snippets because they don't have
Mhm.
attention span. But I would see kids in the bookstore on the night that a Harry Potter was released, and they'd sit
Mhm.
down in a corner and they were already reading, and you couldn't get that book out of their hands. So
Oh, yeah. I remember reading A Wrinkle in Time for the first time at maybe 8 or 9, and that book is dense and weird and full of science, and I loved it because of that. I loved that it didn't feel like I was being spoken down to. And I think that kids can tell when they're being patronized too. And so I approach my teenage audiences with respect first and foremost. I don't think that young adult literature is any less complicated or worthy of critical analysis than anything lit fic or being marketed to adults. It's just a different pacing and different lessons and different characters.
all of your books, they have depth. When I spoke to this group of young people, they were all in 18, 17, 18 years, and they all wanted to know how you become a writer. I said to them, get other jobs. The more you do, the more jobs, like your biology studies and all of the things that you went through learning about science, that all plays into the book. That all plays into giving you depth and understanding of, yeah, knives in the neck and stuff like that.
One of my favorite things about writing, and something I say to people frequently, is that there's no one path to writing. I have friends that are doctors and lawyers and novelists. I have friends that were teen phenoms and published their first book at 19 in college. It's always going to be there for you, and everybody brings their own perspective and their own experience to it. And I think that's so beautiful. It's one of the few, I don't know, industries and crafts where I feel like you can do that. I personally am so grateful that I had a backup plan. I think I would have been panicking if I did not. And two, that I lived a life and worked an office job and knew how to handle failure and setbacks and self start before I started a writing career. Because I think if I had tried to do this at 2021, it would have eaten me alive.
Yeah, it does. Wow. I think what you've done is amazing. This, as you said, you've just turned in the second book. So this is so much fun that you get to carry the characters forward and introduce new characters and different problems all the
Yeah.
time.
I
now,
just feel so lucky. I feel like I'm living my 14-year-old dream life every day.
now, would you do a bargain? And if so, what would you give up?
Absolutely
What?
not. The queen terrifies me. I am so much less brave than my characters. If forced to make a bargain, it would be for something small. I'd want to like always be able to find a parking spot at the mall or like always have my bag come out first at airport security because I would not want to
Ooh.
give up anything too big. But yes, I would stay as far away from the queen as possible. What about you? Would you make a bargain?
Now that you said always get your bag first.
Mine always comes out last.
Me too. Always,
It's like
or
I've been cursed.
if it ever comes out. I flew to New York and
Mhm.
I had clothes for meetings in New York. I
Yep.
traveled in my grungy clothes
Yep.
and I had all my nice outfits for meeting. I was going to visit agents and
Hmm.
have some nice lunches with some authors, and they were all in the bag.
Hmm.
I didn't
It's
see
always the
those
way it
clothes
goes.
until I returned home.
Oh, that's so brutal.
And you do not want to shop in New York City.
No. No,
Oh,
and you
it's
always pack your best stuff. You always packed the stuff you
yeah.
feel best in. So it's like especially devastating.
I was at the Algonquin Hotel.
Mhm.
The shops nearby were horribly expensive. I ended up buying one outfit that I wore for 3 days because that one outfit cost more than all the outfits I had in my bag. It was crazy. Yeah, I
Oh
like
gosh.
that one. You
Okay,
you
that's
got
a
that in
yeah.
my head. You got that in my head. Oh, it's so much fun. Tell us a little bit more about yourself. You're from Utah originally?
I am. So I'm from Utah. I lived in Washington, D.C. for 10 years. And then just recently, this fall, moved back to my hometown. So I'm back in Salt Lake City, Utah with my husband. And it's so fun to be back around family. I miss DC, but I really missed Utah. There's no place quite like home. So yeah, I grew up here. And like I said, I never really identified as a writer, but I always identified as a reader. I grew up in a family of readers, and it was one of the biggest blessings of my life. My parents loved books and made sure that we loved books by example. And then, yeah, I studied biology, went to DC, studied public health. I worked at a children's hospital for, oh gosh, 6 or 7 years, and then quit last May to be a full time writer.
Yeah, I think you have a little bit of a Utah accent still.
Oh gosh, I hear that. It's a weird accent.
It is. It's got that, it hangs at the end act.
try to fight it and I can't. There's a young adult book festival called Y'all Fest in Charleston, YALL Fest. And I went one year and I was explaining it to my husband. And it was not until I came home wearing a t shirt that said Y'all Fest that my husband went, "Oh my God, I thought you were saying Yell Fest." YELL, because I switched my vowels. It's such a Utah thing.
Yeah, it is. I recognize that. I've known a few people from Utah, so because
I can't help it.
I know, it's funny. It's really funny. You're obviously well read. Recently in Florida, when people had to evacuate their homes, and there's always one book that I would take to make sure that I would never lose it because it's not
Mhm.
published now. But what's your most precious book?
I have a first edition of I Capture the Castle, which is my favorite book of all time that my mom got me for Christmas when I was in college. And it's a book about a 17-year-old girl living in a crumbling castle in 1930s England. And it just means so much to me. It's my favorite book of all time. I reread it every year. And the first edition would be the first thing that I'd save for sure.
Yeah, isn't it funny? So what other books influenced you? First of all, your interest in the Victorian era and pre 1400 era. Where did you get all this reading background?
Yeah, I think in order to be a writer, you have to be a reader. So I have read as much and as often as I possibly could my entire life. Looking back, some books that I definitely see that influenced The Rose Bargain were Ella Enchanted, which was one of my favorite books as a preteen when I was 11 or 12. And that's a really great romance for young people. It was like really the first book that made me swoon. I was like, oh, this prince is something. And it has these really creepy, awful, selfish fae. And so that definitely probably wormed its way into my brain with the fairies. I love Libba Bray, who is a young adult historical fantasy author. I think that she is brilliant. I think that all of her historical research is brilliant. And then during the pandemic, the only thing I could manage to read is Regency romance novels. So Bridgerton by Julia Quinn, the Ravenel series by Lisa Kleypas, Tessa Dare, Beverly Jenkins, all of these kind of like traditionally thought of as like bodice ripper romance novels I started reading and realized that they were brilliant, that they were like perfectly crafted, exquisitely researched little books that were so much fun. And those really reintroduced me to the fun of reading. And so reading like 50 of those in one year absolutely influenced the Rose Bargain.
I think it's wonderful what you've done. And a guest on my program last year who was 100 years old.
Wow.
So she's 100 years old and she just wrote a book on cybercrime.
Oh my gosh.
So when you think about it, you've got a lot of years ahead of you.
I
Um,
have always said I want to be doing this until I'm dead. I hope I have like 80 more books left in me.
I this is the fun, isn't it? That's the fun of being an author, that you can do this kind of thing. You can have all this fun, and you can switch. You can switch genres. You can go wherever you want, really, in your head and with your fingers, typing away.
Exactly.
So, how long did this book take you? Took quite a bit of research. I don't know how fast you did that.
Yeah, it took about a year from start to finish. So I wrote the proposal in January and February of 2023. I sold the book in April of 2023, and then the book was completely done by April of 2024. So almost exactly a year from selling it to it being like completely done.
Wow. That's nice too that when you get in the position of being a New York Times bestselling author, you can sell a book by proposal.
It was a big blessing. Yeah. So I knew the plot going in. I had a complete synopsis with a beginning, middle, and an end. I had the first 50 pages. And then, yeah, I was given the security to write it, knowing that it was being published and that I had a wonderful editor to lean on. And they were so collaborative. And it was a really dream situation.
So you found your agent while you had been doing this class with other authors or mentoring.
It was a mentorship program. Yeah. So it was just other authors volunteered their time and expertise to help aspiring authors edit their manuscripts. And at the end of the little 3-month mentorship window on their website, they just posted our pitches. And I got a couple of comments from agents that wanted to see more, including my now fabulous agent, Hillary Jacobson at CAA. And we've been together ever since. We've been together since we were both 25. I joke that she's like my other marriage. And I'm so lucky to have such a wonderful creative partner and business partner.
I've always said that an agent is worth their weight in gold. And I don't know how much she weighs, but
I got a good one.
I think you've got one, definitely. Any agent who can get you the kind of deal that you're getting and get translated into all these, I get such a kick out of being translated into all of these languages. So Hillary is well worth.
My thorough endorsement for Hillary. She's fabulous.
Absolutely. This is amazing. Young authors or people who are just starting off, not necessarily young, so many are afraid to go through the process of first, if they find an agent, then they're worried about the editing process. When you first started, did you expect working with an editor? How did you find that when you started with The Witch Hunt?
It was really interesting. So I expected to be edited, and I didn't have any problem with being edited. I think that it's a real gift if somebody's willing to go into a creative world with you and give you notes. I have no ego involved. I'm like always happy to tear something apart. But with my first book, I didn't know how to edit. Like it was really a skill I had to teach myself. I think that drafting is easier to figure out. You put one word in front of the next until you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. But tearing something apart and developing things in layers like character arcs and plot and magic, it was a real learning experience. And so I was lucky that I had editors and agents who were so patient with me as I figured out my own process. And I think with every subsequent book, you get more confident in your ability to edit a book. To me, that's the hardest part. I would rather write a first draft any day of the week than be editing something. But yeah, I was always grateful for the edits because to me, it indicated that somebody cared about the world that I was building.
An agent who's been on my program before, and she was telling me that she got this wonderful, really great query letter, and she's reading it and she's getting excited about the story. And she gets to the last line, and the author wrote, "And I think it's perfect, and I don't want to go through any editing."
Oh no.
And okay.
I envy their confidence. I have never felt like anything I've ever written has been perfect.
That's not a good attitude. You know, so many authors are almost like the agent is a problem. Not understanding
Mhm.
that an agent wants you to be successful because they want you to make more money. Did you find, for example, did you have any words that you kept using over and over in your book that the editor said,
Oh my
"Oh
gosh.
my gosh."
I'm sure I have tics. Everybody's always raising their eyebrows in my book. They're always like eyebrow emoting, and that's how they're
Oh.
expressing emotion. And I read a review. That was a positive review. It was nice, but they said they were like, she always refers to a dress as a confection. And I was like, oh no, I do that. Yeah, I try to control F search for words that I feel like I'm probably using too much, but absolutely my crutch words slip through.
Do you have any pet peeves in writing or in reading?
It's so funny. I feel like I should, but now that I am writing more, I'm becoming more comfortable with breaking rules. Like for a little while, I honestly didn't love perspective switches. I really preferred books with one singular narrator. And then I wrote this book that has 8 different perspectives in it. So I can't say that anymore. And that's the first thing that comes to mind. I read a book where there were perspective switches, but they were in different tenses, even though the actions were happening at the same time. And I found that really distracting. But that's honestly the only thing I can think of. I admire when somebody takes a risk.
And you have like flashbacks.
Yeah, I'm all over the place.
You're all over the place. I thought so too, but it works. It all works. So you are just so clever. Your writing is very clever, and uh, I think one of the things that people are looking for nowadays. They do want depth in their reading. They do want to come away with something that they'll recall, something that maybe they never thought that of something in that term. And then once they've read your book, it will always come back to them. And I like that. In addition to
Thank
the
you.
teeth,
Yeah. That's always my goal is to strike the balance between something that feels meaningful and like it has a real message, but is also just deeply fun and propulsive to read.
now that you turned in the second book, are you taking some time off? What are you what do you do?
No, now my editor's pretty quick, so I actually will probably have this draft back within the next couple of weeks, and so then I'll dive right back into book 2. But in the meantime, I have 2 ideas that I'm starting to write kind of proposal documents for. So I'll send those to my agent, and she will tell me what she's thinking, and then It's the nice thing about having a partner is all of the decisions are not up to me. She can guide me in a direction, which is nice. But yeah, I have some ideas about new YA kind of historical romantic fantasies, and we'll see where the wind takes me.
Done a pilgrimage to an author's house that you admire?
I have never gone out of my way particularly, but on trips I've gotten to go. So I was in Bath last spring, and so I got to go to the Jane Austen house. That was really meaningful as a massive Jane Austen fan. And then my husband's family has a house in Key West, like right next door to the Ernest Hemingway house. And so I've got to go to the Hemingway house as well. And I'm less of a fan of Hemingway than I am of Jane Austen, but his writing studio is still really cool to see.
Who do you like best, Jane Austen or Charlotte Bronte?
Oh gosh, I actually am an Emily Bronte girl. I'm a Wuthering Heights girl through and through. But just like comparing bodies of work, I'd probably have to go with Jane Austen, though I love them both.
I moved to England when I was 21 years old because I wanted to live near where Jane Austen was born. I bought a old cottage in a little village, and I used to go and picnic on the grass near where she was born, on the grass
Oh,
where she used to sit, where she used to walk.
oh, that's so meaningful.
But in the end, my favorite book is Jane Eyre. But I'm glad I didn't move.
Up to the moors.
Oh no, my gosh, no gosh. That that's nice in the spring, but
Yeah,
you don't want to be there in the winter. So
it's tough.
yeah, okay, Wuthering Heights. That we'll go with that one. That's great.
Mhm.
I'm always interested. Oh no, I forgot to mention you like crystals. What's your
Oh,
star sign?
I am a Pisces.
Oh, a Pisces. Okay. The interest in crystals and stuff would come because in Utah you have a lot of crystals. You
We
have?
do. Yeah, yeah. A lot of mining and kind of spiritualism out here, both of those things. No, it's fun. It's like always one of my favorite gifts to give somebody a crystal and be like, here's what I think you need this crystal for.
I had a geode from Utah. Um,
Probably. I used to go hunting for geodes when I was a kid and we were camping and I'd crack them open with my
yeah,
friends.
exactly. That's why I recognize the Utah accent because I had a girlfriend who came from Utah, and she might have been the one who gave me my geode. Anyway, it's wonderful to talk to you. I think you're fantastic. You let's tell people about your website. You have a nice website, by the way.
Oh, that's you. It's all me just trying to update it. One day I'll get somebody more talented than me to design it. But as of right now, it's cobbled together by yours truly. Yeah, you can find me online. It's sashapsmith.com. I keep it updated with my tour events, where to find signed copies, content warnings. And then I'm also active on Instagram at Sasha Peyton Smith, where you can see behind the scenes peeks in my writing and my travels and everything that I'm up to.
You're one of the first people who has content warnings on their website. Uh,
I think that it's becoming more and more common in YA. When I'm writing for a young audience, I'm totally comfortable putting them online. And if people aren't comfortable with a topic yet, they just know going in and they're prepared. Some people have very strong feelings about content warnings, and it's a discussion I don't feel qualified to weigh into. But on my website, you can find them if they're helpful, and I'm happy to provide them.
you're not doing it because the publisher insists.
No, no publishers ever insisted. Really, just a couple of readers asked, and it felt like a pretty small ask and something easy enough to do.
Okay. Well, again, I think you're fantastic. You're an inspiration, really. It shows
Oh,
that people can they have a dream of being a writer and can do other things in your life, but then at one point when you sit down and actually write that book, it makes you feel pretty good, doesn't it?
it's my number one piece of advice is just finish the draft. You don't edit the first three chapters forever, just finish the book.
That's right, because
Exactly.
that is the joy of writing is to see your words on paper. And once you see your words on paper, you actually can't stop writing. It, it's
Mhm.
it, this is the best addiction you can have. It keeps you busy, it keeps you out of trouble because if you're not writing, you're researching. So you are so busy all the time.
It's like having homework forever, but the best kind of homework.
Exactly. I think you're fantastic. And the name of the book is The Rose Bargain. Beautiful, beautiful cover. And look for those special editions on you can go to Barnes and Noble. I love Barnes and Noble, and they have a special edition of this book. And The Rose Bargain by Sasha Peyton Smith. You've done a wonderful job. Thank you so much for joining me today, Sasha. It's been a joy to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Bye bye now. Bye.
Bye.
It was so much fun to talk to Sasha about her new book, The Rose Fantasy. As you can see, it's a beautiful cover, amazing. And it's a fantasy, a romance. You combine it and you have a romantasy. And for young adults and a lot of adults will also enjoy this book. Meanwhile, please subscribe to Joy on Paper Live. Just click that button, subscribe, and then comment and share. And especially make a comment, because authors really need comments. They love to see comments because they, as Sasha said, you spend so much time alone in your room writing, and then you come out for your book releases and you get excited. So they look at their interviews, they love to look at comments, just like they love to look at comments on Amazon or in Barnes and Noble. So please make a comment here, make a comment on Amazon, because they really appreciate it. And remember, their families are also reading the comments, and their families get really excited when there's a great comment. So just write a comment, please. Meanwhile, again, please subscribe to Joy on Paper Live so I can bring you more interviews with fascinating authors. And Sasha is definitely fascinating. Bye bye now.